You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution podcast, just a short bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the British attack on Bristol, Rhode Island on October 7th and 8th, 1775. During the siege of Boston in 1775 and 76, the British Army was trapped inside the city of Boston, surrounded by a hostile and much larger army. Soldiers could not plunder the countryside for the necessary food and supplies needed to sustain the army. Instead, they primarily relied on the British Navy, which controlled the waters around Boston, to provide for whatever the army needed. It's an issue as old as time that armies and navies in the same country don't often get along well together, and this was no exception. General Gage and later General Howe grew frustrated with Admiral Samuel Graves. There's a story going around that Mrs. Gage and Mrs. Graves got into this huge feud over the details of a party that was supposed to take place in Boston, a question about whether they should allow dancing or not, and this seemed to further distance the two officers. And there were other petty things as well, like the fact that the Navy charged British soldiers a fee if they wanted to take a fishing boat out into Boston Harbor in an effort to feed themselves. When the Navy did acquire food, they usually skimmed off the best for themselves and left the rest for the Army. Now, these petty disputes aside, getting food and supplies for the Army in Boston was no easy task. Bringing supply ships from England did not work well, since most food spoiled before it could make the trip across the Atlantic, which took 6 to 8 weeks. Many transport ships did not make it across the ocean due to storms or privateers. For many supplies, including fresh food, the Navy would have to seize it locally and bring it to Boston. In addition to this, the Navy was tasked with monitoring hundreds of miles of coastline with only a couple of dozen ships. This allowed plenty of opportunity for American privateers to sail out and capture merchant ships or other supplies that were trying to feed the British regulars in Boston without the Navy being able to catch up with them. To collect the food, Admiral Graves tasked various Navy ships to raid some coastal towns and take by force whatever they needed. Among the officers tasked with this duty was Captain James Wallace, commander of the 20-gun Rose. In late 1774, the Rose had sailed to America with the job of helping to enforce the coercive acts, including help keeping Boston Harbor shut down from all commercial traffic. The Rose covered the waters around Connecticut and Rhode Island, trying to prevent smugglers from bringing in arms and ammunition for the rebels. Wallace and his crew faced hostile treatment from the locals when he remained in Newport, Rhode Island during the winter of 1774-75. Once the war began in April, Wallace began intercepting all ships and also arrested several suspected rebel leaders, which he sent to Boston. Wallace received orders to requisition food from the locals and do whatever he needed to do to get it if the locals were hostile. One of his targets was the town of Bristol, Rhode Island. At the time, the small coastal town had only around 200 households. Most of its money before the war came from commercial vessels and trading. Since that had been shut down since 1774, most of the residents had had no way to make a living, and the town was on hard times. The people consisted mostly of patriots, although there was still a sizable loyalist population living among them. On the night of October 7th, Wallace sailed the Rose and a fleet of 14 other vessels into Narragansett Bay looking for food. The fleet began bombarding the town. A short time later, one of the town leaders, William Bradford, rode out to plead for mercy. Wallace informed Bradford that the attack would stop if the town produced 200 sheep and 30 cattle for the British Navy. Bradford retorted that there was nowhere near that number of animals anywhere near the town. After some bargaining, Captain Wallace agreed on a price of just 40 sheep. The townspeople supplied these. The following morning, the British fleet moved on, but not before firing a few additional shots at houses on Papasquash Point and Bristol Ferry. With that, the raid on Bristol came to an end. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. I originally covered this event in episode 75 of the American Revolution podcast. I encourage you to subscribe for free on whatever podcast platform you like. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.